We're going to be talking about every year of downhill skating from 2010 to 2020 and who the most influential skater of that year is. The influence could be from their racing career, could be from video parts, it could be the way that they skate is unique, it could be the gear actually that they used. But whatever it is, it influenced others to do things the same way that they did. Some of these skaters kind of dominated like a couple of years, like maybe like 2012 to 2015. So I could have probably picked a lot of years for them, so don't get hung up on the year exactly. Think of it around that time period. So let's get started. 2010. The most influential skater of that year was Kevin Reimer. Around the year of 2010, Kevin Reimer was an extremely dominant racer in the racing scene. He perfected the pre-drifting style of racing and was the world champion in 2009, 2010, and I think 2014. Some of the ranking systems get a little confusing on there. On top of his racing career, he improved the technology behind downhill skateboarding a huge amount. Aero Trucks was one of the most successful and is still one of the most successful precision truck companies out there, releasing the K1, K3, K4, K5, soon to be K6, as well as the P2. Lots of people still skate some of the older truck models, including the K3, like myself. Kevin is also responsible for teaming up with Powell Peralta, which is pretty much the only major skateboarding brand in the world that downhill has ever become really a part of. And because of this, they created probably one of the greatest downhill skateboarding wheels ever, which is the Snake, which led to other companies having to catch up in their development of that wheel as well. Powell Peralta wheels are some of the best downhill wheels in the entire scene, and we have Kevin to thank for that. Alright, let's move forward into 2011. In 2011, when I think of the 2011-2012 era, I think of Skatehouse Media. And when I think of Skatehouse Media, I think Louis Poloney. Skatehouse Media was pumping out so much downhill content, more downhill content than anybody else. Skatehouse Media was a skate house in Southern California that had a variety of different skaters living there over those 3 to 4 years that it existed. Most importantly, though, is the amount of footage that they filmed constantly. There was always fresh footage out from Skatehouse Media, and skaters from that time period were constantly watching their footage. Louis' skate style was pretty advanced for the time period. Louis, when I think of Louis, he did race, but I think of his freeriding mostly. Being able to do 180s down big mountain roads, doing drifts, stand up, as well as switch drifts, stand up into corners. Now, he wasn't going as fast nearly as a lot of skaters are freeriding now, but nobody was really doing stand-up slides into corners, especially switch like he was. Louis is also responsible for the Sector 9 Daisy, which is probably one of the most popular downhill boards ever. The micro drop single kick style of the board can be found nowadays with so many other boards, but the Daisy was the first one of its type to have this formula. In 2012, Skatehouse Media's reign continues with another member of the house, James Kelly. While James Kelly was the world champion in 2012 as well, his contributions to fast free riding, as we like to call it now, are pretty much what makes him so influential. Being able to take actual legitimate race lines into corners and doing it all stand up was brand new for the time, and nobody was really touching that except for James. While Skatehouse Media showed the mountain climbing aspects of downhill skateboarding, in 2013, there's a huge boom in people getting into downhill skateboarding, and not everybody was going to immediately be comfortable drifting through corners down mountain roads, especially with traffic. In 2013, the most influential skater of this time was Ethan Kochard. Ethan Kochard's extremely technical, but maybe slower speed style seemed much more approachable, even though it was extremely difficult. Ethan Kochard had an amazing style to watch, seeming very lightweight and popping in and out, changing his height from a full crouch to fully standing up is just a very exciting way to watch downhill skateboarding. Not to mention that he was really hard to predict because he had a huge variety of different downhill slide tricks. Several boards that would come out during this time, I think, were heavily influenced by Ethan Kochard's style, being these kind of wheel cutout boards with double kicks with maybe a micro drop, something like the original freeride boards or the Longboard Larry double kick Penguin, long name. But those were really big boards during that time period. In 2014, we see the dominance of a few new young guys into the game, such as Liam Morgan. Liam Morgan's old videos crack me up because I forget how actually young he was when we first started seeing videos of him with LBDR and Team Greasy and all of that. This is also honestly probably the time period where I think of like crews popping up more than anything else, and I think that the rise of LBDR and Team Greasy is really what honestly popularized that. Skaters were creating their own cliques within their geographic area that they would use to try to represent themselves. I think that Liam Morgan is also probably the person who has the most pro models of anyone I've ever seen. He has 3 pro models just with Comet. Then he's got one with Arbor, and then he also obviously has his own board with Prism, his company. Liam Morgan really became so popular as a skater because he pioneered the idea of doing stand-up slides above 100 feet. Just absolutely massive held out stand-up slides. That was really the first time we'd ever seen something like that. In 2015, we see our first European rider showing up, Toni Bicicleta. Now, I could have put Bruno Serrera or Toni on here. Really, the whole Parapro collective could be placed here at the 2015 year. Toni is probably one of the most well-rounded downhill skaters I've ever seen, using downhill, freeride, freestyle, and even street skating aspects. Compared to a lot of the other riders on this list, Toni's videos actually do hold up even still today, and they're still very impressive skating and really fun to watch. And I think it's because a lot of his videos seem like it's maybe the first or second time that he's taking a run down the hill and he's not fully prepared. We might think that if they're not fully prepared to max out the run, then that's a bad thing. But a lot of times what we like to watch is the actual dangerous aspect of it. And if it doesn't look like you're putting yourself in any light amount of danger, and it's not very fun to watch a completely predictable run. Now, Toni always struck me as a pretty humorous skater, but as I watched the videos, I pretty much found that it was Parapro, the video editor and filmer, who was really adding a lot of this humor to it. There were some funny moments of skating, but a lot of the humor comes from Parapro themselves. In 2016, our most influential skater is Max Caps. This is the big year of technical skating. I remember on Facebook, back in the day, I remember when Max Caps posted his race setup for the 2016 Soldiers of Downhill. And Soldiers of Downhill, for those of you that don't know, is a very fast race. I want to say the track hits 60 to 65 miles per hour with a really tight chicane right in the fast section. And also during this time, the road was in really bad shape and a lot of the pavement was pretty rough. Max posted his setup online and it was set up with 134 mil Ronins, which is extremely thin for the time. And a lot of people doubted his ability to survive the actual hill itself with such skinny and reactive trucks. Not only did he skate it without injury, he also won the entire event. This is the first time people ever saw skinny trucks being used. Almost everybody was using 180s or maybe 160s, but nobody had ever seen something with sub 150 millimeter trucks racing because we just didn't think that it was stable enough. After this, a lot of people started to question race tech and what they needed to be in their setups. This is where we started to see skinny boards, skinny trucks, extremely wide wheels being used in racing like we do now. This is also the time period that people started wearing gimp suits over their leathers to add aerodynamic support, or wearing chainmail like at the top speed challenges to add weight, or seeing aero kits on their boards. And Max is constantly still pushing this. He also popularized the idea of DIY in general, where he was posting chopped boards and selling them that he had made, as well as other types of kit that you can use on your board to make you faster. And nowadays, you barely ever see any pros that have a completely stock board setup. They always have some inserts or multiple foot stops or something like that on their board. The most influential downhill skater of 2017 is Emily Pross. Now in 2017, Emily Prost became the first female skater to win in the open class division at a major race, Mount Jefferson in North Carolina. This is a huge milestone in downhill skating, and we'd never really seen a female skater be so dominant within her own class, which she still pretty much is. She dominates the women's class, still today, but also to compete amongst a lot of male competitors. With downhill skating being so male dominant, Emily's win at Mount Jefferson was huge for inclusion in women into the sport of downhill skateboarding. Also, I want to say that Emily's whole routine of training for racing was a bit new for the time. And I remember her posting like workout videos and things like that, and that had not really been much of a thing like it is today. You see people actually working out to compete in downhill racing. In 2018, we see a skater that honestly could be probably a lot of the years in between 2010 to 2020, and that's Chase Hiller. There's a lot to say about Chase Hiller. He's an extremely competitive racer in the scene and has been for a long time. He's one of the best freeriders in the world, doing outrageously huge stand-up slides. And he's also had a huge influence on the overall board setups that we use. Rojas trucks. Not only that, but we see Chase skating a lot. We see him being filmed constantly, whether it's by Molov in Missouri, or if it's by some other filmer who is traveling around with him. Chase is, I think, one of the only skaters that I see where people literally copy his entire board setup, like component for component. The same Rojas trucks, the same exact board, the same seismic wheels, because they see how good he is and are like, well, I need that, right? He is like the biggest marketing tool I've ever seen in downhill skateboarding, and I think if anybody's getting paid in this, I think he is. He might not really be, but I don't really know. He might be. I hope he is. I hope Chase is getting paid. But there's a cult of Missouri skaters who have almost exactly his setups. There's like probably 10 of them who just skate the exact same thing as him. Last thing I want to say about Chase is that he is probably the most comfortable skater I've ever seen skating at high speeds. He makes skating look extremely casual and also just very natural. In 2019, we see Australia really coming to the forefront of the downhill skateboarding community with Harry Clark, the world champion. Now, Australia has been around as a huge player within the downhill scene for a pretty long time now, but it wasn't until Harry that they had a true world champion. Nowadays, we see a ton of skaters from Australia. We also see a lot of new media coming out of Australia. I believe was also the first really dominant skater skating on slalom geometry, on the slalom rogues, which kind of just proved to everybody how good the slalom geometry could be for downhill skating, with him being the world champion and all. And he was also on Magnums, but I think like most skaters knew that Magnums were like really good, even before he was skating them. But he won the world champ, so we'll give it to him there too. Magnums was his doing. Alright, our last downhill skater for the year 2020 is going to be David Bubbie. Now, we see Asheville, North Carolina as kind of like, honestly, kind of like the downhill skateboarding mecca of the world. I've never seen so many people move to an area for skating than Asheville, North Carolina. And I think that David's footage and overall vibe and style helped to create that knowledge. David is kind of like the poster child for North Carolina skateboarding. Extremely laid back in their style, non-competitive, very stand-up, slide friendly, and kind of lifestyle skater. Like living somewhere for skating, not necessarily for family or for work or something like that. Like literally being somewhere so that you can skate. And like a lot of other downhill skateboarders in Asheville, David's setup is extremely low tech. A lot of times he is riding a very simple, standard, large, top-mount-ish board, reverse kingpin trucks, pretty traditional ones, and slide wheels. And they're not really thinking too much about it. The whole idea of don't ask what an Asheville skater's downhill setup is because they won't know kind of comes from the low-tech vibe of David. And also David's just a silly boy at heart. A couple honorable mentions that we do have here are Ed Garner, Norman Plant, Aaron Grulich, Byron Essert, Tiago Gomez Lessa, Lars Troutwine, Zach Madem, Eric Jensen, and Mitch Krebs.